Thank you, Nidal. I'm impressed by the amount of people at this time of the day. I thought I was going to be alone with Andrew here, but thank you for being here. So I am by no means a chef, a restaurant owner, so thank you for listening. I have a lot of respect for your profession, and I'm a big fan of everything you do, but I don't have the intention of sharing any trends or any advice on how to run your restaurant because I have no idea. Something else I want to share with you about myself is that I am Spanish, as Nidal said, so I take my food very seriously, and I want technology in my smartphone, not in my plate. So there is going to be a lot of food tech in this conversation, but with a different take. And that being said, even if I'm not a chef, I do know a bit about food. So I have recently been invited to be part of the Royal Academy of Gastronomy in Spain. So I'm glad to be surrounded by chefs and people who do know their food very well. And I have been working on food systems for more than 10 years. So my intention this afternoon is to share with all of you what I've learned in these years and hopefully surprise you with some insights. So as I said, don't find any cool trends, any future or fancy foods in my presentation. This is not the intention. I am going to give you some reflections and ask you some questions about the future of food and what it entails, what's behind the plate. So when I ask you, what is the future of food? I'm sure in each one of your minds, an idea pops up with a very futuristic food item, yeah? I could ask someone in the audience, for example, Andrew, what do you imagine when I say a food of the future? What do you imagine?
I imagine more blurring of the lines between different cultures.
Okay. And for example, here, what is the future food?
Maybe with VR or anything that's like visual that also.
VR, so technology or culture, so two contrasting thoughts. So many people, when I say I work for the future of food, people get scared. They're like, oh, she's going to be printing steaks, or she's going to try to substitute my delicious meal with a supplement or a milkshake. Or she's working with robots so that she ends with all our jobs, or with a lot of technology so that we control our animal and vegetable species. Or maybe some people do have very rosy ideas of the future and they think that everyone is going to eat a very healthy, organic diet. So what happens when we think about the future in general is that we have utopian or dystopian visions. We normally don't think about the future as something very familiar. We don't think about this, for example. We don't think about a lentil soup. And whenever they ask me, what is the future food for you? I always say, my grandma's lentil soup. So as I shared before, I have been for 10 years studying future food systems. And these are some of the photos so that you can picture what type of job does a food futurist do. So I go out into the fields, I talk to farmers, but I also host meetings with leaders from around the world that discuss what are the main challenges and opportunities in the food system. For example, this meeting was organized last year in Spain to draft the national food policy for our Minister of Agriculture. I talked to many chefs around the world to understand their views on food. And this photo where I am cooking with kids is one of the most special moments for me because it was a transition in my career. I used to work in policy with diplomats, politicians, and those types of actors. And one day a week, I did a volunteering at a food bank, and I cooked with kids. And that shifted my perspective on how I could really have an impact at scale in the world. And I decided to quit my job, my very boring job, and start cooking with kids. So some years ago, I found the Future Food Institute in Italy, and they gave me the opportunity to do a food mission around the world to understand what were food systems. I had no idea. I had no training. I had studied international relations and policy, but funnily enough, even if food systems are very related with international relations, there's not much spoken about that. So with Future Food, I traveled for many years around the world meeting food heroes, so people saving our food system so that we can continue eating the delicious food that we ate today, for example. So I felt a bit like Nikolai. I don't know if you saw Dan's talk yesterday, who Nikolai was traveling around the world, finding those seeds. Well, in my case, I was hunting for seeds of change, seeds of disruption. What was changing in the food system? And currently, I lead this global organization called KM0, which is a global community of food change makers. Throughout these years, I've understood many things have to change. So we have created an interesting ecosystem. So complex problems require complex solutions. And this is the reason why when you ask me, what do? I do many things in my organization because we need top-down and bottom-up strategies to figure out how to continue eating what we love eating. This is why we continue working with kids, but we also work with governments, we also work with investors, and we also work with companies. We work in many of these topics that we will see throughout the presentation. And as I say, this is a multi-stakeholder approach. This is a multi-stakeholder decision to transform these big challenges. These are some of the numbers of the amount of startups, so innovative entrepreneurs we have supported, companies, so big corporates that have also trusted in us in their transformation strategies. We will see that volatility will be part of the future, so mitigating change through these innovations, through these disruptions, will make you be the leader in your category, will help you outperform others that aren't doing it, but let's not get too much in front of everything I have to share with you today. So what I've realized is that food systems need to change. Why do they need to change? There are many issues still our food system hasn't figured out. Food access, for example. It is really crazy that 800 million people nowadays still don't have access to nutritious food, while we are throwing away 1/3 of everything we are producing. Our food system was also created to nourish, and sometimes we forget that is the reason why we exist as an industry. And we have been very successful in producing significant amounts of calories, but in many cases, empty calories. So there is a need for a shift from a yield system in which we think about how do we produce more food, and there needs to be a mindset shift towards a system that produces more resilient and nutritious food. And that is what we are trying to do. I think you're not seeing any of my slides, but that's okay, because I learned them, I studied them. Okay, so climate issues related to our sector. We saw some of these numbers yesterday: 70% loss of biodiversity, more than 20% of greenhouse gases related to our sector, 85% loss of marine stocks, 70% of fresh water use, while there are still people without sufficient access to water use. And this is a fun example also related to Dan's work. One of the members of our community launched some years ago. His name is Sam Kass. He's also a chef. He was the chef at the White House, and he was also Obama's senior food policy advisor. So he has been a great friend and a great supporter of all the work that we do. And some years ago at COP the UN conference, he decided to give to all those officials, to all those leaders in the world, the Last Supper. And the intention behind this concept was to give them an idea and a taste of what endangered foods were. So also an excuse to eat very delicious food, seafood, wine, chocolate. So they enjoyed themselves, of course. But the message behind that was that the food they were eating tonight cost around $70. But in some years, with the scarcity of those ingredients, it could cost up to $600. So that was the message behind the Last Supper. We heard about endangered foods from Dan's talk yesterday. We are seeing how supply chains are struggling and being disrupted. And on the photo, you see some of the most loved food items around the world that are endangered due to these rising temperatures, floods, wildfires, etc. So this is a motivation, actually, for everyone in the room to become a food change maker, like all the ones in our community, because we really want to continue drinking coffee. We want to continue drinking wine. There are many catastrophes that are disrupting supply chains. We have seen around the world the volatility in the egg prices. One of our main clients is the main egg producer in Spain and in Europe. And they are living strange times, and us as consumers as well. So aside from this food ingredient, inflation in general is affecting us. So the other side of the coin is, how is our food system affecting our nutrition? We saw all the impacts in climate, but also in terms of health. We see that 40% of the population is overweight for the first time in history. We have more people that are overweight than undernourished. We see that 800 million people cannot afford and access sufficient food. And just a reminder, this is a super expensive public cost as well. So there are many things that need to be fixed. And when I am questioned about why does food need to change, because it's so delicious, so why would it change? And me, as an academician of the Royal Academy of Gastronomy, I wanted to preserve its authenticity, its culture, its heritage. But at the same time, I know many things need to change throughout the value chain of food. We speak about invisible innovation. So what can we do throughout the supply chain without affecting what gets to our plate? So, for example, one of the most controversial topics is protein and protein production. So when yesterday Andrew spoke about new proteins and how we could produce technologically these new proteins, many people in the audience were, of course, shocked and also reactive to this innovative food product. But what I say is that we really need to produce more and more quality food, because only 20% of people from around the world eat like most of us. I guess most of us in the room see something different 3 times a day on our plates. And this only happens to 20% of the population. 80% of the population either don't have sufficient access to food. So as you see, 11% of people are missing sufficient nutrients. And then we have around a 70% that doesn't eat a varied, nutritious diet. So for me, it is evident that something needs to change. The speed of change is faster than our response. This is what I have been seeing, and this is what the experts say. But they also say a hopeful message. They say, together we are rising to meet that challenge. So there are solutions out there. There are people putting solutions out there so that we can continue eating what we love eating. So I'm going to quickly share with you these 10 keys. As I say, complex problems require complex solutions, so it's very difficult to synthesize in 10 keys what we need to do. as a system. But this is some of the insights that were gathered in our latest book, which you can also download and read them thoroughly, because today I will be very superficial in these conclusions. Okay, so key number 1, the soil. Soil is so important, and we have forgotten about the importance of the quality and the health of the soil for our food system. What is interesting also for chefs is that the quality of the soil conditions so much the flavor and the nutrient density of the food items. So the soil is super important to be able to sequester carbon, to be able to fixate nitrogen. It is very important for the production and for the yield, but also for the taste. So there are many technologies working to improve the microbial activity of the soil. I am a big nerd of this topic, and just as we have our own microbiome, the soil has its microbiome, and we have to figure out what to feed the soil. I believe this is a fascinating topic. So one of the examples throughout this presentation, I will be showing companies that we have supported or that we have partnered with that are doing something to improve that specific challenge or that key. So for example, how do we regenerate soil? We know monocrop is not great for soil health. So we learned about this company by Patagonia. Many of you must know Patagonia, the apparel company. Well, Patagonia also has Patagonia Provisions, which is a line of food. And this beer has very interesting, an interesting story and a way of producing it. Instead of using barley, they use kernza grain. So it's also an ancient grain. And why is this grain so great? It needs much less water. It helps, as I said, fixing nitrogen. And this is a perennial grain. So it's much better for regenerating this soil than what barley used to be. But of course, what I believe is most interesting about this food product is that it is called long root ale. And I also believe the CPG companies have a responsibility in demanding for new types of ingredients, because otherwise farmers are not going to be incentivized in moving out of conventional agriculture, conventional crops, because they need to have a demand. So this is why I believe this example is so interesting. Key number 2, water. Water is the gold of the 21st century. I remember when I studied international relations, this was already a reason for war and conflict, and it is still so. We as an industry, as a food system, we are responsible for the 70% water use, and what is much worse is that 50% of that water is used inefficiently, which means we could use actually much less water. And we know that the water footprint of some food items is higher than others, and we can also work on that, for example, with technologies that can measure the amount of water. A tree, for example, in this case, an avocado tree, how much water does it really need? Does it need it in that moment or not? So that we spare every little drop. Key number 3, measure, mitigate, and certify. This key is related to emissions. We saw 20% of emissions are related to our sector, but there is no global standard or global regulator that will make sure these standards are secured. We know our food system is responsible for much of these greenhouse gas emissions, in specific the livestock industry, as we said. But a lot of advancements and a lot of innovation has gone into this new protein space. And we see here 2 companies that are working hard on this. But many things have gone wrong, and we see investments not going in the direction we hope them to go. And why is that? We've done some research. We also work with meat companies. I didn't mention this, but KM0 was founded by one of the main meat companies in Spain and ready meal companies. So we know what the traditional industry goes through. It's not like we're hippies and we are a foundation that isn't in touch with the real food industry. We are, and we were born out of it. But we, as the meat industry as well, we are interested in new proteins and finding ways of more stable production. But what has gone wrong in these developments? We believe taste, nutrition, scalability and price, gastronomic heritage, inflation and rising competition are amongst some of the challenges. We see a huge opportunity in technologies or innovations outside the product. So for example, how can we mitigate emissions from cows? This company, Ruminate, they have developed an animal feed that mitigates methane emissions. So we believe meat companies can also innovate aside from the product. They will innovate also in product, but also outside it. Key number 4, food can extend and improve well-being. This key is about health, longevity. I spoke recently to a doctor that shared with me what the food culture in Japan is like, and he mentioned a concept called harihachibu, and he said this means eating until you are 80% full. You can eat whatever you want, but never get full. So this would be just one of the nudges you can actually do to have a healthy life without modifying your diet. We also work with many companies and startups helping to reformulate products. So without transforming the flavor profile, for example, of a yogurt, how can you have the same consistency, flavor, without shifting the flavor, but improving the nutritionals? This is an example of a company that reduces sugar selectively, which is very interesting. We also work with companies that support during disease, during illness. So this Spanish company is for oncologic patients, and we know food and eating is not a pleasurable experience during these treatments. So we have supported several companies that are tapping into this problem from different angles. Key number 5, transforming food waste into economic value. For me, one of the most evident keys for the future. Transforming food waste into economic value. Why not monetize something that we are already paying for? In the case of the industry, it would be more like upcycling, reducing waste. We see many different types of solutions in that case. In the case of restaurants, I was surprised by some of these facts. So food waste can account for almost 6% of a restaurant's total sales. So we know and we need to transform this because it just makes no economic, no business sense at all. One of the companies that we know of as well is called Orbisk, and they help in measuring and identifying what a restaurant is throwing away, to then take decisions on what to change on the menu, what isn't working. For example, if everyone is throwing the side salad, maybe change it for something else. Revealing the hidden cost of food. This was a new concept for me, but beef is not what's on the price tag. There is a hidden extra cost, negative externalities from growing and putting that food on the shelves. So we see here, if beef, for example, if it really reflected the climate impact or the health impact it has, it would be up to 30% higher in price. And this happens with so many other food items. If we really would take into consideration the negative externalities, the livelihoods of farmers, like so many other facts, food would be so much more expensive. Even if we think nowadays it is expensive, it would be so much more expensive. Making the best decision the easiest choice. So this is about nudging. I am happy to be surrounded by experts and psychologists and behavior scientists working on this topic. I believe it's very exciting what we can do with these nudges. Food education, of course, this was the reason why I am in this sector. And I believe it can be the biggest driver of change, and I think it's the most intelligent investment you can make. Key number 9, we're coming to an end, improving the livelihoods of farmers. The age of farmers is super high. In Europe, 35% of farmers are 65 or older. And we are thinking this problem will just go away on its own, and it won't. So we have no young farmers. When I am asked what is the future food, well, there will be no future food if there are no future farmers. So for me, this should be another of the priorities for the future food. And we know these farmers, who are the ones to grow and deliver that food to us, they are some of the most food insecure people in the world. We work, for example, with this organization, this company called Ethic Hub, and they support farmers in in finance. So they have to make huge investments with very, very low margins. So this is a system focused on coffee farmers. And the last key, driving capital into the right direction. This key, I could talk forever. So investments in the food space, but please do read the book to get all the insights. So as I'm coming to an end and cannot wait to sit with Andrew, I wanted to leave you with this quote, because whenever we are faced with something new, we feel scared. But I want to share with you this quote from Marie Curie that says, "Nothing in life has to be feared. It is only to be understood. Now is the time to understand more so that we can fear less." So thank you very much.
Hi again, everybody. Hello. That was great. That was a lot of information in 30 quick minutes. First question, and I should mention, as with all the panels, we'll open this up to questions shortly, so please be thinking about those if you'd like to ask one. Those are 10 very big topics you just laid out. Is there one that you, or two, that you feel are, I guess I would say, the most urgent or the most pressing or the most far-reaching, however you would prioritize? Are there one or two that you think really need immediate addressing?
Yes, as I mentioned, waste is the most absurd problem we have in the food system, and for me, the most fixable one. So definitely monetizing that 1/3 of everything we are throwing away should be the most urgent one to put into place, and the simplest one. Second area for me would be livelihoods of farmers. So everything we said about the aging population and also all the losses that happen in the farm, the quality of life of these farmers. So making sure we have young people wanting to devote their lives to this sector, for me, is another very important one. And third would be education. So in general, the consumers have a much bigger role in fixing this problem than what we believe we have. So investing in education that helps kids engage with food from a much younger age.
Great. Thank you for all that. So just picking up on two of those points. Food waste. We have a lot of people here who are in the restaurant industry, either restaurateurs and or chefs. Do you think people should be taking a look at the format of what restaurants offer? In other words, if you look at it in reverse, a lot of food waste, some of it comes about from things that never get sold because almost everything that you're cooking or preparing in a restaurant is perishable. It has a very limited time frame in which you can use it. Do you think people should be taking more of a look at, we saw this coming out of COVID when restaurants started reopening, scaled down menus, right, which was based on availability and also based on limited staff at that time, but they were still able to book customers, right? Tasting menu formats reduce spoilage and waste. Do you advocate for people looking at something as fundamental as just what the format of what's on offer is?
Absolutely. So simplifying could be one of the tactics, but there are more sophisticated tactics that not all restaurants will be able to incorporate. But as I showed on the presentation, technologies like Orbisk or others, there are many competitors in the market, help a restaurant measure what they're actually throwing away and implement strategies to redefine menus, for example. Also, finding creative ways of repurposing what is normally thrown away. I think chefs are some of the most creative people, so this is innate to them. My grandma never threw anything at home, so I believe waste is just a matter of not being creative enough.
Yeah, and for inspiration, people could look at things like the Wasted documentary or something like that for some inspiration. You talked about soil health. Obviously, that's one part of regenerative farming and agriculture. It seems there's no question I know that makes a chef or a restaurateur more frustrated than when someone comes to their restaurant and says, how come your salmon dish is $35, but the restaurant down the street has a salmon dish for $24, right? And the answer is almost always how they choose to source their food, right? One is getting their stuff off the back of a, national wholesale provider, and one is probably doing business directly with a number of different farms in their area because that's important to them, right? But there is a cost for that. I'm wondering how much of a piece of really almost everything you talked about does come down to educating the consumer to a place where they're willing to spend a little more. What? You're shaking your head?
Yeah,
no. Is that a no? Is that an agreeing no? Or
no, it's not an agreeing no, unfortunately, because I think there is a matter of lack of affordability of good food in many cases. So as I showed, only 20% of people can afford to eat this way. So I think there is a limiting force, which is money, and I wish we find better ways to make good food accessible for all, but it is not nowadays.
How interconnected are these subjects you're talking about? I know this is an oversimplified question, but from a global standpoint, how interconnected, for example, is what we're doing here in the United States to maybe what's happening in Spain? And are there countries that do, way above average on these topics you're talking about and are able to do that in isolation? Or is this really something that ultimately, because of the globalization of so many things, everyone sort of has to up their game for it to become a reality anywhere?
I think it's a global problem, absolutely. This week I brought together 150 experts from around the world, and they all share the same problem. So anywhere you are looking at, there is a problem of climate, health, and all of these issues we saw. Unfortunately, no one is safe at this moment of high volatility. What we are seeing is that some people are more prepared than others. So as I said, investing in tactics that make you or your country more resilient will make you outperform. So there are companies that are being able to prepare better to the geopolitical situation, to the problems in supply chains. What I can say also is that many companies did not realize how interconnected they were until now, until the moment when the system has broken down. For example, one of our main clients is also an ice cream company in Spain, and they are wondering now what happened to the cacao prices. Why did they rise 200% last year? They never looked into the origin and figured out how interdependent they were, and they never put into place practices that could support those farmers so that they were more capable of fighting adversity.
Great. Can I just get a sense, do we have questions out here? We have one question. Okay, I'll get to you in one sec. How much of this do you think should be legislated? In other words, you're talking a lot about companies that do certain things. You're talking a lot about getting people to come on board with certain ideas. You know, I know that, for example, this is a strange comparison, but you know, during the pandemic, at least here, at least where I live in New York City, you know, a lot of restaurateurs I know just wanted things to be mandated locally. For example, are you going to let people dine if they haven't been vaccinated, right? If the city or the state mandated something, it was no longer them having to engage in communication challenge with their customers, right? It was just, this is the way it is now. This is the law now. Do you think some of these things should simply be legislated from country to country or region to region?
It doesn't really matter what I think. What I see is that that will never happen. We have no global governance. So even if I think that would be great, and it would be great to have a global measurement system, that will never happen. And we are now going from a multilateral world when at least power is a bit more spread out to a bilateral world where practically the US and China are fighting and the rest of the world doesn't really have much of a say. And those two powers don't have much of a willingness to play a role in this transition. So even if I believe a global governance to ensure good food for all is necessary, I don't think it will happen.
And an individual country doing it unilaterally isn't going to necessarily, even a few, is going back to what you said before about how interconnected this all is, isn't going to really make a big dent in the problem.
We have the example of what we tried to do with the Spanish government, putting forward a national food policy, and we see the example of what the European Union is trying to do to regulate over food policy. But that is just putting us in a position of uncompetitive advantage against the rest of the world.
Right. Okay, thank you. Let's go to this. I know we have one question over here. Yeah, over here.
Hi. Is it working? Can you hear me? Have you heard of the book, The Sacred Cow, and the benefits of grass-fed? Do you acknowledge the benefits of grass-fed pasture-raised beef farms and the benefits they bring to the soil's microbiome, and how grass-fed beef farms can actually pull carbon from the air?
I haven't read the book, and I believe and share what you just what you shared in the room, and I'm a big fan of low-tech innovations.
Yeah, totally different from factory farming, but you do promote it, like you agree with it.
As I said, it doesn't really matter what I agree and disagree with. I am a big fan of low-tech solutions, as you explained.
Yeah.
I see the gap in the amount of food we need to feed the world, and we are figuring out how to increase the amount of high nutritious and resilient food we are able to feed the world. And I believe we've done a great job, and we are better than ever in terms of the amount of calories we are putting out in the world.
What are your thoughts about culturally some countries eat bugs and insects? What are your thoughts about how I know that that is more sustainable than any having farm animals, having farm of insects and bugs? But how do you think, how can we introduce that culturally in other countries and that can become a way of sustainable food?
Thank you. So food should always be culturally relevant. And I think it's great to continue harnessing the beauty of that type of cuisine wherever it's loved and welcomed. I have seen how it can fail when you try to impose it in a culture where it is not familiar. So for example, one of our first investments, because we also invest in food companies, was protein bars made from insect flour. And it totally failed. And this was 6 years ago in the Spanish market. And we tried to foster that type of innovation and put it out there because we believe it has a high protein content, but it didn't match the consumer needs or palate. So I think it will continue to be big in countries where it's connected to their cultural identity, but not so much elsewhere. One of our other investments that has gone very well is insects for animal feed. In specific, we have invested in a factory of black soldier fly, and it is used for the fish industry. So I see a high potential there.
Hello. While listening to your talking points that were so great, what got my attention is the aspect of educating the population. And one of the notes was on the labeling carbon footprint on the produce that people are buying by bringing the awareness. So how far are we in the world right now from implementing this and bringing that awareness where you choose the product, choose the impact that you make in that space?
Thank you for the question. It depends from country to country. So when we speak about the consumer or how well will this or that work, it really depends on what geography we are speaking about. So in countries like Spain, for instance, the climate impact and that data related that could be labeled on the tag won't have much of an impact in purchasing decisions, whereas maybe in the Nordics it has more of an impact. So it really varies. I have seen companies that do a great job. For example, Planet Forward has a great measuring system because before labeling or communicating whatever, you need to ensure you can measure your whole supply chain. And so there are ways of measuring and communicating, but it is not as effective as we would like it to be. It does not tend to shift purchasing behavior, and price is still the main driver.
The legislation part about as well with the government.
How about implementing this on the government level? Is this something that we're moving in that direction to have the laws that require companies?
No, I think we're moving away from that direction. Let's see what happens in Europe. So, for example, we were very bold with plastic regulation, and now we are realizing the standards we set are not that easy to get in those timings, and the alternatives are not that great. So I don't think we're getting there.
Okay, we're going to have to let that be the last word. We are a little over. Can we have another round of applause, please, for Beatriz?
Thank you, Andrew. Thank you.